Yep. Hi, Cam.
Hey, Quilla.
Nadia.
Let's start recording now because I should have done that before. Welcome again, Cameron Clark, Debt Free Justice, the national campaign to eliminate youth fees and fines against minors. I'm here as well with my co-coordinators, Miranda Sheffield from the National Center for Youth Law and Nadia Mozaffar from the Juvenile Law Center. And also here with our amazing panelists today for our conversation on some of the issues that we all have been feeling and navigating in the Black community relating to kind of the culture, to the critical moment that we're in right now politically, and also towards the future, looking at the ways that we can kind of move towards a collective vision of liberation together. You'll forgive me. My hair is a little bit wet. I was trying to make sure that it looked as laid as possible for this. So if you see a little drip drop, please forgive me. But I'm excited to introduce our panelists and begin the conversation today. So first, I wanted to introduce, let me make sure I get all of our information out, Dr. T. Anansi Wilson, a legal scholar and consultant associate professor of law, and a Black scholar that received their PhD from the University of Texas at Austin and their Juris Doctor degree from, please remind me, Dr. Wilson.
Really? HU, we out here, Howard
Excellent.
University.
Excellent. Thank you.
You know?
I did know. Okay.
Yeah,
But
don't
I
play
wanted to
it.
give you that opportunity. Thank you again for joining us. We also have Bree Easterling, who's a social justice outreach and organizing specialist with Policy Matters Ohio. Welcome as well, Bree. And Quilla David, who is a Stoneleigh Youth Advocacy Fellow with the Juvenile Law Center. So our three panelists today are going to engage in some conversation on a few different issues that I think are pressing within the culture right now. We've broken up the conversation into about three subjects: Black liberation and Black art, Black liberation and Black reforms, and Black liberation and Black futures. And so within those kind of three buckets, we're going to have some freewheeling conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about Not Like Us and Kendrick Lamar and some of those cultural moments, but also talk about, again, the political moment that we're seeing, not just at the federal level with the new administration, but also at the state level and local level, where we're seeing a lot of change happening as well. We'll then end by thinking about more broadly where this movement is taking us and where we might be able to further plug in and connect with one another as we continue in this liberation work. And so, with that, I'll pass to Miranda to move forward with our conversation, and I'll chat with you a little later. Miranda.
Again, good morning, everyone. I am excited to help us move through this discussion. As Cam mentioned, we have three different areas that we would like to highlight. And just as a heads up, if folks are having any types of questions, we're hoping to leave some time for Q&A. But if there's questions that are coming to you while we are talking, please feel free to get busy with that chat and put those questions in there. And I'm going to kick us off. So the first area that we would like to jump into is we would like to first talk about how important art is when you're thinking about Black liberation and why during this particular moment it's important to utilize art to speak to the times, but also how we want to really engage with how art has been impactful throughout the many different social movements. So my first question is, this can be to anyone that's on the panelists, but how do cultural pop moments like Not Like Us reshape the movement for Black liberation? What do y'all consider that to be?
Sure, I'll jump in really quickly. I think that so I was listening and my partner's watching on Zoom, so they're probably gonna laugh in the other room when I say this. But as always, I'm listening to some old soul gospel, right? Some Carlton Pearson. And I was listening to Azusa Street 2, right? 1993 or 4. And he was saying that it seems like every time, right, there's something that Black people go through and they get into prayer and there's a cultural moment, they kind of miscarriage into creating a civil rights movement. right? And so I think that is kind of what happens in these moments. It's that we're in a place where we've been pushing and we've been fighting and we've been trying not to be unalived. And even when we are dealing with the process of being killed slowly or quickly by law or others, we are trying to do so with dignity, and we get tired. And so I think moments like Not Like Us act as both a kind of cultural reset, but also a spiritual shot in the arm, right? This type of like almost a spiritual caffeination where we're rejuvenated in this moment to push forward and we're able to see with clarity as if we've had some rest. And so I think that's what things like Not Like Us, things like Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn, things like Strange Fruit, before that, right? Things like all of the gospel of Mahalia Jackson and others that carried us from the civil rights movement to the politics of like disrespect with, gangster rap and what have you, right? Fuck the Police and other songs like that to this current moment. And I think that's what we generally need, even though we still got to be critical of the songs that move our souls to the dance floor.
Mhm. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Wilson. Very well and encapsulated with how you responded to that. Anyone else like to respond to that question?
Yeah, just to add to what Dr. Wilson was saying, like um, you know, I feel like it doesn't necessarily like because like how you were saying like reshape or shape the movement. Um yeah, I think that, as like Dr. Wilson was saying, like it being more so like a antidote, or like, if you will, or like, I don't like to use the term band-aid, but just like, just that little to just keep you going just a little bit more. And I think that speaks to the healing nature that is inherent with in art, and Black folks' willingness to find some type of way to express what we're feeling, regardless of whatever mechanisms of oppression that we've been under. Like, we've always found a way to express what we're feeling, and done so in a beautiful way. And so, I feel like doesn't necessarily like the way that it does shape the movement is that I feel like, it does it's it provides and promotes like the health and wellness needed to be able to sustain in this work and in this struggle.
Thank you, Bree. Thank you. Um, if we have plenty of questions, so we all don't have to respond to all of them. But I, want to definitely make it where we are giving everybody an opportunity to respond. But I would like to move to one of the other questions, and Quilla, particularly given what Bree and Dr. Wilson shared about how we speak to art and around Black liberation and stuff, how do we think about the role that young people particularly play when it comes to art and advocacy for youth rights? How does that connect? Because we know how powerful youth have been when we think about these moments, but what do we need to consider when we're thinking about the role of art and advocacy for young folks' rights?
Yes, art can play a powerful role in advocacy. And I really believe that it can allow us to get creative in our advocacy. Myself and other YA members, we were a part of creating a public art exhibition called #NoKidsInPrison, where we used artwork, poetry, and virtual reality to imagine a world without youth incarceration and alternatives. And so our goal was to really have people who have never gone through the system to get a deeper understanding of what we went through and what we endured, and not only to just read about our experiences, but to visualize them. And so we displayed artwork from young people that were incarcerated. We gave public tours of the exhibit, including to the media and to our city's legislators. And so two powerful points of our exhibit was that we created a cell, that way folks could get a sense of the isolation that young people were put into. And so we also created a giant receipt bill of the total charges that it takes to incarcerate a young person, and it was just very, very powerful.
Mm. Well, what stood out to me most is that not only seeing on a piece of paper or hearing it, but visualizing the experience. That's a bar, as the young folks would say. I really like that, how you said that. That's so important in this particular moment. I have one more question, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kim. My other question is, what forms of Black art are speaking to you in this moment? How can art be further integrated into our activism and organizing? Um, Anyone could feel free to pick up on this one.
I could chime in there. For me, um, the art that has like I guess really spoke to me lately has been the art that um not even that I can necessarily see myself in, but my community. So a lot of like black, queer, and trans art. Like just unapologetically black and trans, and just like in the most mundane ways, like painting pictures of, a black tea for tea couple that's just having tea on the couch, that appear elderly, like seeing what my future self can look like in art and through art is what has really been speaking to me lately, especially being showing up, that how I show up and how I identify. We don't see a lot of elders that identify like me. And so for, artists to envision that and be able to create something beautiful out of that thought, out of that hope of seeing themselves and ourselves in the future, that's what has really touched my heart lately. And Quilla, I seen that you had come off mute at the same time, so I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to you.
You said me?
Go ahead, Quilla.
I didn't come off mute. I'm sorry, y'all.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. All right. That's all good. Um,
Yeah, I'll just add to that really quickly because I think that Quilla's answer earlier about what is the importance of art in for youth advocacy. I think that was just like I had to sit with her comment for a while because it was really hitting. But I think it's important. So I was listening to Toni Morrison this morning. There's a reel going around on the female poets on YouTube, on Instagram, and she was saying that like it's so important to remember that like art is dangerous business. Like art is a bloody business. And so as we're kind of talking about, and as Bree was just talking about the beauty of artists imagining, what does it look like to be a black trans couple in your end of your life stages? And by end of life stages, us actually not thinking about trans death in this moment, but also thinking about the extension of trans livelihood, I think is something really interesting. Because if we're thinking about like art being this inherently bloody, dangerous business where, because you're the one telling the truth about office holders, you're the one telling the truth about the law, you're the one telling the truth about even your mom and them, right? You're telling the truth about you. It's a life of exposing and exposure, but it's also a life of exposing oneself to violence. So often, so many of our most innovative and impactful artists across space and time are youth. And so that also means those are the people most proximal to death, right? We don't have a lot of very old artists. And it's a very new thing to have people that live a life like Maya Angelou or Toni Morrison. And then we think about our Black, queer, and trans artists, they're dead. And so I think it's also important for us to kind of really sit with as we're thinking about like what is bringing us pleasure, like who had to die in order, right, to bequeath us a type of pleasure? And also, what does it mean? What does it mean that death is the fertile ground of innovation, and it's that our children are having to be creative about these kind of protest movements? And even then, when we're using this art and youth advocacy, what does it mean that like these children not just creating new art and being innovative, as Keela said, but also they're modeling new ways of existence. Like their very livelihood is art. And our very role, oftentimes, as people that are, goodness, now I'm getting older, that are, becoming our elders and things, is we're often telling them that's not how you behave. That's not how you act to live, right? And they're not thinking about living, thinking about thriving. So I think that this is such a really interesting moment to kind of sit with both the comments of Bree and Keela about like life and pleasure and death, but also art and art coming out of death in proximity to it. Just brilliant thoughts.
Thanks for that, all of you. It made me think, Dr. Wilson, I follow you on Instagram, and I think you had a quote up from one of those dearly departed elders, right? Brother James Baldwin. And I think it was something along the lines of, with all of these different forces coming at us and death dealing against us, they're trying to silence us, and we must write louder than their silence can kind of attempt to make us, right? And it made me think about the ways that, for Brother Baldwin, his writing is what speaks for him now. Even if we aren't seeing his voice or watching, videos or conversations that he's made, it's often his words in writing that are, traveling across the world and making such an incredible impact.
Yes, like what does it mean to be a scripture?
Hmm.
Right. And I think that's the prayer that many of us have, right? I hope that when I'm dead or when all of us pass away, there's something that we've left that becomes a litany for survival, that becomes a kind of navigational roadmap of how do you live this life? How do you get to thriving? How do you do this with pleasure and with ethics? Right.
Hmm.
And so, I think that's the prayer, that's the appeal. How does one become a scripture?
Hmm.
Yeah, I was just about to thank you. I'm sorry, but I just had to say like because it just brought up a great point that like art is like a catalyst for immortalizing blackness.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
immortalizes you. It allows you to live forever.
Hmm.
Um, and I think like that example just from uh James Baldwin and how his work and Toni Morrison and all of our artists that have passed away. They work live on. And if they work live on, that means they live on. You know.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to give that some space to breathe as well. Um, you can check me on the segue here. We're going to transition to this next subject, and what it made me think about in the segue is the ways that for as you all have spoken to, art is oftentimes the ways that we immortalize ourselves, and maybe outside of the Black community, one of the primary ways that folks immortalize themselves is through policy. They write laws, they create bills, they either pass laws or they're working on litigation, they're doing lawsuits, they're getting court opinions written, and that's oftentimes another form of kind of history and of legacy that is left for us. So for so many generations, Black Americans were fighting for a seat at the table, right? With the idea that once they had a seat at the table, once they could write their own laws, once they could write their own opinions, that would be another way of immortalizing our influence and our culture and our values in this American system. And that's what I kind of want to talk about now is kind of the impact of that work that we've seen, maybe over the past, probably two decades or so, right? I'm thinking certainly kind of '08 Obama era, and the moments that we felt at that time having a Black American president. We're in this moment of kind of recoil right now, where November of last year there was the wish or this dream that maybe a Black woman would be running this country, and that is that dream is no longer the case, right? We want to think about the role that Black liberation plays in this context of policy reform. That's obviously the work that we do within Debt-Free Justice, but specifically in the context of reform and the ways that reform creates a tension with maybe the ideas that we have of liberation. So maybe I wanted to start with maybe just this kind of common phrase of Black faces in high places. Maybe folks here are familiar with it. The notion that if you have a person that looks like you, that is like us, right? In one way or another, that is at the helm of an organization or at the helm of government, that has an influence on the ways that government may actually operate and perhaps creates the infrastructure needed for significant change, especially in the context of racial justice and specifically in achieving Black liberation. I'm curious if anyone wanted to kind of speak to how they conceive of this idea of Black faces in high places and whether we've kind of been able to test out the hypothesis. Do we feel that having these folks in these positions of power has really helped us to move the needle forward in meaningful ways? How do we change or manage our expectations in difficult times like these, where we may or may not have folks that look like us in positions of power? Maybe I can start with Dr. Wilson.
I know he's gonna do that. Yeah. So I feel like, look, I love words and words have meaning. And so I think when we think about, black faces in high spaces, we have to think, are they black, right? And that's one thing. Or are they black people wearing blackface, right? Like, what does that mean? And so when we're thinking about this idea of representation and representation mattering, is this someone who was representing your values, your interests, your ideals, right? The conditions of your living and dying, right? And using power to push those interests, right? And those solutions into fruition? Or is this just a representation of your ethnic or racial group? Right. And so I think that's the problem. We're more thinking about the spectacle of having a black person in the room, in the boardroom, in the police force, in the prosecutor's office. That spectacle of like, oh, there's one of us. It feels so nice. Rather than the outcome of our interests being presented again and again and again and again, true definition of representation, until they're adequately dealt with, right? And so I think that there's this underlying assumption and ideal that those things automatically come together. And I think that many people, like, Du Bois, and others who are pushing for the notion of the talented 10th, right? This idea that we want your most brilliant and most skilled in whatever areas to go off and to be leaders and interface with white supremacists to get what they can, right? To be the Robin Hoods for us. I think at that time, perhaps, right, there was an idea of like really deep Black racial solidarity. But I think as we've come out of the integration era of the 60s and retrenchment of the 80s and 90s and back to kind of neo-segregation right now, we've realized that many Black people's interests now are the idea of having white privilege itself and being seen as being deserving of white privilege based upon the degree they got or the school they went to or the fact they haven't been arrested or the skill and talent, they're great at sports, whatever, as opposed to the notion of Black community property, right? And community property as in like we are each other's and we have a duty to love and protect each other always, as Asada would say. So I think that's the thing. We give people a pass and we assume that everyone has our interest in mind, when in reality, the Black person next to you is just as much as an anti-Black white supremacist as the person in the White House. They just don't have the language or the grammar or the power to exert such violence. So I think that's where we get kind of caught up. We don't have accountability. We have a bit of naivete. And I think there's a deep psychological trauma going on with the notion that even if we really know the truth, and we do, that there's a lot of Black, anti-Black people, but if we actually really take that seriously, can we psychologically handle that it's not just the folks that don't look like us that would have us dead? What does that mean that no one can be trusted until they demonstrate it? And I don't think people can live like that. So I think there's like a bunch of necessary delusion that goes on. But I think also if we really want to have some resources, if we want to have liberty, right, and liberation, we have to get serious about the fact that, baby, this is just like COINTELPRO. There's people inside trying to take you down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely that. I just want to add to that because especially like showing up again, like holding that identity as being black, trans, and queer, you know, there's not I haven't been afforded the luxury of not being harmed by people that look like me. Because on one hand, you know, your blackness is a strike, and then in your community, your queerness and your transness is a strike. So um, in terms of, the that was a sobering reality at a very young age. That, representation just didn't, that wasn't going to be enough. Um, and so, and I think that, not only is everything that Dr. Wilson said and the, uh, the lack of, critical thinking to go beyond race into more of a class analysis, because the black cop is still a cop. Okay, like, a black military force is still, it will still ensue violence, will still, take up the practices of imperialism. Um, so, a black psychologist still has the authority to pink slip you. So like, yeah, until we have to go beyond we have to, and that's, I mean, it's a dangerous game, right? Like, that's what got, some of our predecessors killed. Martin Luther King posed the most legitimate, or immense, imminent threat to the U.S. government when he stepped into that class, solidarity. And it's the same thing with, with Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party, and so on and so forth. Fred Hampton, and the Rainbow Coalition. Whenever you step into class solidarity, it becomes a very, very, dangerous, atmosphere. But yeah, I mean, to that point, yeah, the black faces in high places is not going to save us, which is the end of that. Yeah, that that's definitely, true in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think what it makes me think about too is how proximity to those high places can sometimes be a corrupting force, right? I think about things I'm seeing in New York, right? I'm thinking about this Black History Month event that the president just brought on, and who in fact attended, right? And who was kind of brought forward as hero representatives of the culture to celebrate on behalf of the community, right? And what does it mean when you're putting certain people on a pedestal and spotlighting certain people and giving them a mic where they then think that they can speak on behalf of the culture in oftentimes really harmful ways. Um,
I mean, look at the HUD secretary, like,
mhm.
right? Like, Donald Trump has appointed this big, goofy, grinning black man who has, like, y'all know that sound that like white supremacist black people have when they talk? They do a weird thing with their mouth and it like contorts their voice in a very strange way. So you already know they're anti-black as soon as they say hello. He sounds like that. But the idea that this guy was just on, the White House YouTube channel bragging about all of these anti-DEI and anti-woke cuts to the Department of Urban Housing and Development. Right. So you're literally on here bragging about how you're hurting black people for a department that was literally made to implement the Housing Rights Act. Right. Like, so this is something that, to your point, Martin Luther King is pushing for racial and class solidarity, gets this bill passed, Fair Housing Act. And now you got a black person in the White House bragging about tearing down its protections for racial minorities, which was the whole point of it on a Black History Month celebration. Like, it's just, sorry, Kim, I had to say that because that's just news to
Right.
me.
No, please do. Right. It's kind of undoing all of this work in the name and using kind of wielding tools that had been used initially for racial justice, right? Using the 14th Amendment as a cudgel now to harm the same communities that it was initially meant to support, right? And I think there's definitely much more to kind of think about and talk about in that regard too, of how to kind of beat that back, how to combat that. I wanted to ask as well, and maybe, Quilla, this is one I'd love for you to jump in on as well. It is kind of how do we think about, and maybe you could share some of the challenges you've navigated in kind of dealing with and engaging in policy reform, but specifically kind of when talking to youth, right? What are you telling them? What are you kind of hearing that folks are thinking about when they kind of enter into these political spaces, when they're trying to go and meet with the legislator or trying to, move forward a piece of legislation? How are they kind of navigating that same question about the role of having certain people in certain positions to be able to move work forward, and kind of considering their own power in those moments?
Yeah, so the black faces in high places is very intimidating for young people. And so a challenge for myself and many other young people was not using our voice for reforms. And I also did not have the correct language to explain what I went through or what I believed was right. So I didn't know anything about systemic oppression and hegemony, which is how the system controls youth in the Black community. So I had a lot to learn. But once I did use my voice to make change, I saw that power in myself and other young people. And so we're overcoming that.
And
Absolutely.
what might I ask, because that I think is a really key point, right? Is like the gatekeeping, right? Like there's certain language you have to know, there are certain people you have to know. You got to get your foot in the door to even be able to share all of the stuff that you've learned. I'm kind of curious if you could share more about kind of your process of even kind of developing that knowledge, right? Like what were the spaces that you were in, or what were the resources that you maybe had access to that started to give you those tools so that you started to feel more ready to go and take it directly to the people in power?
Yes, Cam. And in the beginning, our resources were very limited. And so we kind of we built our youth advocacy program, and we wanted young people to learn more and more political knowledge so that we're more prepared when we go in front of our legislators. So we really had to do this on our own.
Got you. Getting it out of the mud. Another, we're pulling as many Kendrick kind of references as we can, as we move forward with this. Maybe one last question on this before I pass it back to Miranda. Many folks, especially kind of in law and policy spaces, have heard of this theory. It was coined by Derek Bell, who was a first Black professor at Harvard Law School. The concept of interest convergence. This notion that in order for us to be able to move some of these radical reforms for Black liberation, think civil rights movement, think Reconstruction, there had to be initially an effort by Black folks to convince white folks that it was also in their best interest, that they were benefited by reforms in support of Black people. So, in order for Black reforms to be achieved, in order for Black liberation to be achieved, part of that theory was arguing that you had to find those areas politically where there was alignment, and only in those ways could you be able to incrementally move change forward. It seems like right now there is a moment where converging interests are hard to find, right? It seems more and more difficult to be able to connect over things that used to be the hallmarks of interest convergence, which was empathy, compassion, right? Seeing, someone that is different from you as similar to you, right? All of these things nowadays are framed as being too woke, too DEI, right? Not efficient, right? And kind of in the economic language that is being used by folks in the administration. And so I'd be curious to kind of hear from folks just really briefly on whether you think the strategy moving Black liberation forward at this moment still calls for that interest convergence. Is the goal still to try to find alignment with those folks that are in positions of power that may or may not look like us, but perhaps certainly do not have our interests in mind? Or is there some alternative that we need to be looking to, some collective vision that doesn't require us to necessarily pigeonhole or shoehorn or funnel our ideas through some other means or some other kind of fact checking or confirmation source before we are able to move forward with them?
I guess I'll step in first with that one and say, in a short answer, yes, that we need to be looking at alternatives. The reason why is because like how you explained with having to appeal to the white demographic or white legislators about this benefiting you in order to move things forward is still very real right now. I see it every day in my job as being a policy researcher and having to, have policy recommendations and, oh, in order to appease Republicans, we have to have a workforce angle, right? Oh, it's always about workforce, workforce, workforce. But all that does is place a price tag or and dehumanizes the very people that we're trying to advocate for. If the only way that we can get them to see us or see this as a benefit is by appealing to them being able to continue exploiting our bodies through labor that's not even a livable wage. Yeah, it's like that is not working. It's still not working. And in the midst of in the midst of all of these I, for me, and having to be in these spaces where you're in the state house, you're talking to policymakers and things like that is extremely violent, right? And so, in the midst of the reform work, which in my opinion, for me, is simply harm reduction. That is the only way that I'm able to even sustain in this work, to, get a check, through the nonprofit industrial complex, is to see it as harm reduction. It's not true. I don't see it as true acts of liberation. Not, I consider myself an abolitionist, and reform is not abolition. And so, like, when I'm thinking about that, yeah, there definitely needs to be alternatives, and there are alternatives that are happening. There are alternatives that do happen. What happens is that once those alternatives occur, they either get snuffed out or they get stolen and commodified through the U.S. government. So, like Black Panther Party, we had the breakfast program. That was an alternative outside of outside of the government institution. They took it. The same thing with mutual aid and alternative police response programs in cities and things like that. We had these things going on, and then they the government, local, state, federal, they always do things under the guise of, oh, collaborative effort, collaborative effort, collaborative effort. We have to collaborate to push this forward. It has to be a collaborative effort. And the whole time it's just a play to undermine the true steps towards liberation. So, I mean, and this is just being honest, being frank, and I know, and I realize that many of us on this call are in these spaces where we're advocating for for policy reform and for eliminating driver's license suspensions and eliminating fines and fees, and that is needed, and that does provide instant relief, tangible relief for our community. And honestly, fines and fees is really the only entity of reform that I really can I don't know, put myself behind or lean into the most, I guess, because it does provide that tangible, immediate relief in terms of monetary what people need to be able to survive. But in terms of true liberation, that's not ever going to come from reform, ever. And that's just real.
Thank you for that. Miranda, back to you. Let's talk about some Black futures.
Okay, folks, this is a very important session for me. It's something that we were doing our really great brainstorming with me and Cam. I always am like, my question is, what about the Black radical imagination? Okay, we got a whole space for that. And so I wanted to make sure that we end this by talking about what does it mean to engage in Black liberation and Black futures. I know a couple of years ago, with the movement for Black lives, one of the things I really liked that they did was that they made sure to say, yes, we must, acknowledge our past, Sankofa, in order to go forward. We must look to the past. But they also were like, well, what about our future? What does that look like? How do we hold space for that? How do we think about Afrofuturism and the liberation of us in a space where we're not constantly having to deal with the challenges in front of us? So I wanted to start us off with a question in regards to this. So the first question I have is, and let me see here. Is Black liberation / abundant Black futures compatible with American law and government? What limitations does the current system place on our ability to envision a just future?
Jesus. Okay. Um, so in answering that, let me just read this quote. It says, African Americans have for more than a century before, been regarded as beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, either in social or political relations, and so far inferior that they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. He was to be bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic whenever a profit could be made by it. End quote. So that's the decision from the Dred Scott decision that's never been overturned, right? So that's important to kind of think about. And this goes back to, I think, Kim's earlier question about interest convergence. And as a critique, right, Derek Bell is using this to say the civil rights movement was a failure and that Black rights are only as secure as white interest in them. Right. So it's not a pushing for interest convergence, but it's used to criticize like what we've been doing, to your point. And so I do think, and I was having this conversation in New Orleans this weekend at a conference, but I think that if you want Black people to be free, then the country has to end as we know it, right? There is not a way to reform oneself out of white supremacy when the founding documents and before the founding documents, the Federalist Papers, right, require an understanding that Black people are three-fifths human and two-fifths property, right? So even as the 13th and 14th Amendment acknowledge a Black humanity, right, a Black citizenship, there's still that interest in Blackness as property, right, and Blackness of subservience, and this idea of whiteness as property, and the notion that white identity, white being, the kind of notion of white consciousness is required as a response to Blackness. It's given value by someone else having less than. And so I think it goes back to the Toni Morrison quote when she's asked about what do you do about white supremacy? And she says, look, I always knew that white people were morally bereft. Right. And not because their existence is bereft, but the idea to engage in whiteness, to think that you deserve these things, tells me that you are intellectually and morally inferior to me, and you don't even know why. And she ends the quote and she says, if you can only be tall while someone else is on their knees, then you have a serious problem. And she says white people in America have a serious problem, and they must understand what they're going to do about it. But I think in terms of like Black liberation, and I'll land the plane here, you can't have Black liberation as a kind of thing, right, in a Black future, without the kind of abolition of whiteness as the surround. So, I was a high school teacher, I was a college professor, now I teach law. And in each of these cases, I've had my little liberatory moments. But I'm understanding in many ways, as what Bree was saying, these are moments of harm reduction and they're liberatory experiments in the classroom. And I'm wearing the bell hook shirt, right? That says the classroom remains the most radical place of possibility in the academy. And that is true. But even then, right, if you get caught doing a liberatory practice, you're rejected. So I think that right now we're in a space where we're birthing, we're midwifing, we're making space for these liberatory Black futures, right? But in so doing, right, and just like for Black women, childbirth and midwifing is the most dangerous part of a Black woman's life. And the same thing is when we're practicing liberatory works. So I don't think that we can have, to your point, I don't think these things are compatible, right? The nation that we have and the futures that we want, every time we do a reconstruction, white people put on their hoods and they start blowing shit up. And now they're not even got no hoods. They just got an orange Cheeto in the White House, right? And a South African white supremacist as the president in chief. And now they're doing what they've been doing every 60 years since black people got here in this country. So it just seems cyclical. It's predictable. You know when white folks are going to act up because you just got some rights and it's been 3 years and now they're angry.
Absolutely that. You know, I was thinking, I saw a quote right before here by Trisha Hersey from the Nap Ministry that said, I don't want a seat at your table. I want a pillow and a blanket and to rest. Like, I, and even that, even just wanting to rest when the country is inherently built on black labor. If my future, if my black future is simply rest, that alone isn't compatible with the American law and government. My black body cannot rest in peace, alive here. It simply cannot. And so yeah, you know, that in terms of the limitations that our current system places on our ability to envision a just future is all the things. You know, look around, look at homelessness, look at the fact that like most of America can't afford an emergency over $400. Like, you know, so yeah, 100% to what Dr. Wilson said. And Quilla, if you have anything to add to that, I'll pass it on to
Miranda, if I really could just jump in ever so quickly, I put in the chat the quote, and I put a link here to the page. And if anyone goes and clicks on this link and looks at the page, I swear you will see a picture of Miranda laying in a field with a pillow and a blanket. If you look at the image that this is attached to on Instagram, it is a picture of Miranda laying down in a field. Like it literally looks like you're right there right now, Miranda. So I just need you to look at it at some point. But it looks just like you're laying down on a like it looks like you're experiencing the dream. So anyway, continue.
Yes, we need a little bit conjuring. I'm so here for that. But yes, Quillo, is there anything you would like to add to this? I have one other question that you could feel free to jump into if you want to move to the next question. But you're welcome if there's anything that came to you that you would like to say.
That was very, very powerful and moving. I definitely want to check out that quote. So I'm definitely looking for that. But I'll take the next question.
Okay, Quilla. So, and Cam, is our hard stopped at in 5 minutes?
I mean, I think, we set it for an hour, but I'm happy to go a little bit over if we need to. So if anyone has questions and stuff, feel free to add them.
I want to be mindful of folks' time. So I'm going to, if I'm gonna see if Quilla, you would like to respond to this or anyone else. But yeah, if people want to stay on, you're welcome to. I could stay on all day, but here we are. How do we envision Black liberation beyond the mechanisms of governance that we are limited by? What futures, be they examples of things that have happened on an international level or examples that have happened through the venue of art, music, TV, or film, should we consider as inspiration to help us envision a Black liberation beyond the current mechanisms that we have? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would we visualize with that? How would we embody that?
I think part of it actually starts like at home and not necessarily with your parents. I think that's always people love a nuclear family, but whatever that might be. I think it actually starts with the relationship to your partners. What do you do when you feel hurt? How do you respond? right? So I think our intimate relationships, and whether we're talking about sexually intimate or emotionally intimate with our partners and our closest friends, is actually where we kind of prove the truth of our abolitionist politics and praxis. So how do you react when you're afraid, right? How much time do you give people to correct a harm or a trespass? Is it your interpretation of the harm that matters, or their idea of what they thought or what they meant or tried to do? How do you go through these conflicts? How much time is allowed to cool off? How many times do people get to grow and change, right? And what does it mean to care for someone, even if you can't be in close proximity to them at the moment? So I think until we're able to really ask those questions, deal with people that we have been intimately connected to and we have loved, I don't know that we can then extend a kind of governing notion to deal with strangers whose only connection to us is they've been killed similarly to us. So I think we have to really begin to think about, what I think Bell Hooks calls, love ethics, and what I've kind of retitled that critical love ethic and abolition is like, what does it mean to be human, and what is the legitimate wielding of violence? Because all law is, right, is permission to be violent and permission to violate, and then harms for if you do it illegally. So I think we need to really begin to imagine, like, is our system that we're thinking about in terms of government or liberation, or maybe even a space where there's anarchy, is our system too governed by the legitimate wielding of violence? Or is this about the sustenance of life? And I think those are very, very different guiding questions that determine who we are, right? And who we think we are at our core.
Wow, amazing. Um, Thank you so much for that, Dr. Wilson. It's saying what's the prep work to get us to Black liberation. We gotta we gotta start a little bit, backtrack a little bit, okay? And say like there's some things we gotta address before we can move on to go onto the spaceship of a Black liberation journey. And at the core, what I heard you say is how do we be in community with each other before we are really truly embodying Black liberation? And that
Right.
means being able to name conflict, being able to name harm, being
Yes.
able to address harm before Black liberation is truly embodied.
Because I don't want to be on the spaceship with some of y'all. No shade. Like, we might get to the landing and everybody's dead because some people on the spaceship have not done the work, right? And those of us that could assist them with that work have not done that work, right? And so, if we just gonna go to another planet or another space and do the same white supremacist anti-black stuff, I can stay here. I ain't gotta go space travel.
Yes, very good. Well, it's 1 minute left. Are people wanting to stay on for a little bit? Did anyone have any questions? I do want to provide Bree and Quilla an opportunity to respond to this, but I also wanted to see if anyone on the call had any questions that they wanted to share with the panelists. Me and Cam have been indulged in this panel discussion to where time management maybe was not at its best, but we were allowing it to flow, letting the spirit move us. So yeah, anyone have any questions? If not, I can just let Quilla or Bree respond to close us out.
Yeah, I just wanted to lift up the importance of restorative justice practices, because that's the only, um, you can't get to liberation without restorative justice. Um, and again, when you have compounded marginalized identities, you're not necessarily afforded the luxury to jump out of community with people that have harmed you.
Mhm.
Um, and so, you know, many of us, you know, whether we realize it or not, have the tools to be able to, um, you know, practice more diligently and intentionally those restorative justice. Um,
Mhm.
so I just wanted to put that out there. Um, yeah, I think that's all I had, in reference to that, and asking people what what happened to them versus what's wrong with them, leading with a trauma-informed approach. With and like how Dr. Wilson said, like starting not even necessarily starting with your most intimate relationships, but starting with yourself. We have so much like shame um around like traumas that we've experienced and encountered, and, not even realizing how critical we are of ourselves, and the abuse that we ensue on ourselves, that internalized anti-blackness, so just be more gentle with we just need to be more gentle with ourselves, um and then practice that within our most intimate relationships, and move outward that way, versus trying to move from a trickle down approach. We know that if in politics a trickle down approach doesn't work, it's not going to work. Trickle down doesn't work. We have to start from the core and move outwards. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Very good. Paula, any last words for you that you would like to uplift when you think about your Black futures and Black folks being free, as young folks organizing and stuff? What comes to you?
Yes. Well, first, I'm very, very moved by this conversation that we had today. And I just want to end by saying that sometimes we're fighting for change that may not come in our lifetime. And I just want us all to feel a part of a history that is bigger than us all. So that's all.
Yeah, Kula, you are just so great with the words. Like there's the perfect way to end us off with this. Thank you for saying that. That's just an amazing way to bring this to a close. That it's a labor of love for those to come, and I appreciate that. Me, Cam, and the rest of us are going to figure out how to do this on a regular, because I feel like an hour was just not enough. And I feel like we really want to like have more space like this. So Dr. Wilson, Bree, and Quilla, from myself and the rest of the coordinators, we extremely thank you for taking the time to be here with us and to share space. I actually feel like Cam, you're supposed to be saying something. And
No, I was like, you got it, Miranda. Just the same thing. Just, a million thank yous for making the time to do this. Miranda, this was your brainchild. And so thank you for this idea and bring this into the space. And, chefed this up in a couple of weeks, as we do. And I think we're able to create a really beautiful and what I felt like was a candid and safe space. And so, to our panelists, thank you for making the time. It's not free work that we're asking you to do here, and so we thank you for making the time and doing this and having busy schedules. Thank you to our attendees for joining and listening intently and sharing with us in the chat your thoughts and your feelings on this. Again, this is our work with Debt Free Justice. We bring together organizers and activists from across the country to move forward, specifically on youth fee and fine repeal, but more broadly on work that is seeking to achieve liberation for Black folks and for folks across the world, regardless of skin color. And so we wanted to celebrate Black folks today and celebrate Black history and Black liberation, Black present and Black futures today. And I think that we've definitely accomplished that. So wishing you all a pleasant end to this month and the pleasant beginning to next month, where again, we will continue to be Black, continue to be out here, making our best efforts to live and thrive and survive. Any final thoughts from anyone before we take off?
I just want to say thank you all so much. Just been an honor to be here and have me here in this conversation with some incredible people. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's great to be here. Great to be in convo on Twitter a little bit, but mostly on Substack these days. So find me there. Let's definitely stay in conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Alrighty, everyone, take good care. Be well. All we got to do is be Black and die. Isn't that the quote, right? So I charge you to do those things, to be Black and to live. Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.